Hello and welcome to Ex-Witness a Week. We have for you part number 2 of the 2022 annual meeting of Jehovah's Witnesses. Let's see what kind of fun stuff we got here. This is going to be a talk by Jeffrey Jackson. Let's just let him get into it, and I'll throw my commentary in as I go. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe and all that good stuff. And let's run the introduction.
Well, at this time, we're going to hear from Brother Jeffrey Jackson. He has an interesting theme: be alert, be decisive.
We are living in the last of the last days.
Don't steal Stephen's
That
lines.
means soon we are going to face events that will test our integrity as never before.
So I wonder if Jeffrey Jackson's integrity was tested when he got before a judge in 2015 and said the things that he did at the ARC. You were tested, and I think you failed.
Yes, now is the time that we need to be alert and decisive. Now that's a similar situation to what our brothers found themselves in the first century. Yes, they had some traumatic events that faced them. What were some of the events that early Christians had to deal with? And how did Jesus prepare them to face those events? And what does it mean for us today? Well, first of all, I'd like you to imagine this scene. We'll go back in time to Nisan 9, 33 CE. Do you remember what happened on that day? Jesus was mounted on a donkey. And in your mind, can you visualize you're with Jesus as he starts to go down the area from the Mount of Olives in the Kidron Valley, looking up towards the city of Jerusalem? What happens? The crowds start to gather. More and more people. People start throwing their garments on the road. Others cut down branches and wave them around. They call out, "Blessed is the one who comes in Jehovah's name." The whole city is in uproar. How exciting that would have been. And yet, at that exciting moment in his life, Jesus started sobbing and crying. Why? Let's turn to the record in Luke chapter 19. Luke 19 and verses 41 through 44. And here the inspired account tells us that when Jesus got nearby, he viewed the city and wept over it, saying, "If you, even you, had discerned on this day the things having to do with peace, but now they have been hidden from your eyes, because the days will come upon you when your enemies will build around you a fortification of pointed stakes and will encircle you and besiege you from every side. They will dash you and your children within you to the ground, and they will not leave a stone upon a stone in you, because you did not discern the time of your being inspected." What do we see from these verses? Do we see the compassion Jesus had for those who would be killed when Jerusalem was to be destroyed?
So here's a question for you. If you're a Christian, you're supposed to be Christ-like. And here you're showing that Jesus had compassion for other people, for people who are going to be destroyed. So where is the compassion for people that you are seeing are going to be destroyed at Armageddon? Where's the compassion that you have for people who are being cast out from their families and from their friend groups. I don't see a lot of compassion there. It doesn't really seem like you're being Christ-like in that respect.
Yes, he was envisioning the destruction that would occur in the year 70 CE. He was moved by the emotions of that, so much so that he cried loudly, not silently like he did when he was about to resurrect Lazarus, but audibly, loudly. Now, what do we learn from this? Well, for a start, we can see Jehovah's love for people as reflected in Jesus. Jesus was very distraught, thinking about what would happen to that city and its inhabitants. And then in verse 44, what was the other thing that Jesus was distressed about? That was a time of judgment, we might say, or inspection. Yes, even though Jesus was thinking ahead to future events, he realized that they were missing the opportunity at that time to do something, things that they needed to do to prepare for the future.
So anytime that I hear, what do we learn from one of the governing body, I'm a little skeptical of what's the next words that are going to come out of their mouth, because if you're going to teach using the Bible, use the words that are in the Bible. If you're just going to make up things or speculate on things, make it clear that you are speculating, because it is dishonest to say, well, this is what we know, when the scriptures don't actually say that. So, it doesn't have to be even anything terribly serious, but this example he's giving that we can see a reflection of what Jehovah God feels through his son. But you could use the example of, my kid loves to eat cheese sandwiches. Does that mean that me as his father loves to eat cheese sandwiches? No. It's not a reflection necessarily. It could be, depending on what it is. That's just my point. You can't make assumptions like that and make it out like the assumptions are the gospel.
There's something else that we learn too. Not only do we learn from the compassion that Jesus displayed, which we should likewise display when we think about what's going to happen to this wicked world.
See, he's talking about compassion, but it just doesn't feel sincere to me, because they don't have compassion for people who are out of the organization. They're supposed to turn to a message of condemnation and death and destruction soon, according to their beliefs. And I just don't see that as being a compassionate thing.
But also, if Jesus had so much emotion and feeling about wicked people who are about to be destroyed, how do you think he felt about his followers? Do you think he wanted to prepare them? Of course. And that's why we're not surprised, 2 days later, why he took aside his apostles and gave them some instructions. Let's turn there to the record in Luke chapter 21 and verses 20 through 22. Jesus is recorded as saying, "However, when you see Jerusalem surrounded by encamped armies," now in this case he's referring to 66 CE, "then know that the desolating of her has drawn near. Then let those in Judea begin fleeing to the mountains. Let those in the midst of her," that's in the midst of Jerusalem, "leave. And let those in the countryside not enter into her," or enter into Jerusalem, "because these are days for meting out justice, in order that all the things written may be fulfilled." Did you notice that there were 3 groups of his followers that he was referring to? He spoke about those who lived in Judea, so that wasn't just Jerusalem, that was the surrounding area. So they were told, get out of there, flee, go to the mountains. Then he spoke to those who would be living in Jerusalem, and what did he say? Leave the city. And then the third group, those who would live in the countryside. We know many people were farmers, and they lived in open areas doing agriculture. Normally, what would be expected is if armies were to come to a certain area, these people would flee into the fortified city. So what Jesus told them to do was the opposite. So no matter where his followers would be, whether in the countryside, in the city, or in the general area, what was the common denominator? Don't flee to the city. Don't put your trust in Jerusalem. Yes, Jesus was telling them what they needed to know before the events would occur. Now, what really was the lesson that Jesus was impressing on these ones? Well, although those he was speaking to at that time were Jewish, they had to realize that Jerusalem was no longer the earthly seat of Jehovah's kingdom. They had to also realize that the temple was no longer the center of Jehovah's worship. So Christians had to get those facts clearly in mind, make their decisions at that time prior to the events that would come later. Now, maybe we could illustrate it in a modern sense. Many of us have had to face the issue with regard to blood transfusions. When do you need to make your decision with regard to that? Is it when you're in the ambulance, semi-conscious, in pain? Is that like, oh, hand me the DPA? Can you read the fine print? Or is it when you get into the emergency operating room and you start arguing with people and asking questions? No. We realize that now is the time that we need to make our decisions. Then we need to live by those decisions. And then, if an emergency should occur, we'll be ready for that situation. That was the lesson Jesus was teaching them.
I don't feel like that was the thing that Jesus was trying to teach these people back then. I feel like he was warning them of something was coming, and they needed to get out, and that was it. And if you got killed by getting back in there, I guess that was your fault. But I don't think Jesus was talking about making a decision and keeping to it when it came to the blood issue, or perhaps deciding to be one of Jehovah's Witnesses and then having to stick by that decision that you made when you were a kid. Doesn't quite feel like that. I guess you could say Jesus was saying, have faith in what he's saying, and things may look like they're not as bad as they are, but they're going to get worse. So I guess stick to that decision. But I feel like it's kind of a stretch to make this into a thing about, when it comes to a particular doctrine, that you have to stick to that decision, because you might have new information that tells you need to change what you're doing. Like, I'm going to find out that some of this stuff isn't true. The things that they're teaching isn't true, and that you are just risking your life for no good reason. And by that logic, too, anybody in a particular religion that isn't a Jehovah's Witnesses, well, they should stick to their decision, too, because they made a decision, they're following what Jesus said, so they shouldn't consider becoming one of Jehovah's Witnesses. So you see how that's kind of doesn't make sense?
Yes, the Christians back in the first century had to rid themselves of any feelings of nationalistic pride, any feelings that Jerusalem was the city. Otherwise, they would make the wrong decision. This was especially true in the year 66 CE. What happened in that year? Well, let's consider a brief overview.
Surprise, a video!
Most of us are familiar with what happened toward the end of 66 CE. At that time, the Roman army under the leadership of Cestius Gallus attacked Jerusalem. But unexpectedly, they retreated, allowing time for Christians in the city to flee Jerusalem. Was that the only thing that happened in the year 66 CE? No. Let's look back in time to see what other events took place. This will help us understand why Christians needed to be alert and decisive beforehand. First, let's think about the background. The Jewish nation was fed up with Roman taxation and corruption way back in Jesus' day. But by the beginning of 66 CE, the situation was even worse. The Roman governor of Judea, Gessius Florus, was totally corrupt and was notorious for his cruelty. The spirit of rebellion was everywhere. Judea was a powder keg ready to explode. Around the spring of 66 CE, Florus plundered the temple treasury in Jerusalem, stealing some 17 talents. This caused a revolt among the Jews. In retaliation, Florus ordered his soldiers to attack the rebels and allowed his soldiers to plunder hundreds of homes and to kill some 3,600 Jews. However, the Roman assault was repelled, and Florus and his men retreated from the city. If you were there at that time, how would you have reacted? Would you have been outraged by Florus's action? If you lived in the countryside, would you think the Romans may return and now was the time to flee to Jerusalem? Christians needed to be alert and decisive. Remember, Jerusalem was not important to Christians. It was not the place of safety. What happened next? Eleazar, the son of high priest Ananias, gained control of the temple area. He suspended the sacrifices offered to the emperor, and then drove the remaining Romans out of the upper part of the city. If you were there, would you have been proud, happy that the corrupt Romans were forced to leave? Remember though, Jerusalem was not important to Christians. It was not the place of safety. Christians needed to be alert and decisive and not distracted. Then around July-August, Menahem, the leader of another Jewish faction, overran the Roman fortress of Masada and seized Roman weapons from there. He then returned to Jerusalem and captured the tower or fortress of Antonia. They set fire to Herod's palace, the palaces of Agrippa.
Naturally, you must suspect me to attack with Capafero.
Naturally, but I find that Tibble cancels out Capafero. Don't you?
Unless the enemy has a study, he's Agrippa. Which I have.
And Bernice, as well as High Priest Ananias' home. Then they ordered the murder of High Priest Ananias and his brother Hezekiah. Following that, they returned to the fortress of Antonia and massacred the garrison of Roman soldiers still there. The city was divided and in uproar, so Menahem and his men escaped back to Masada. Do you see how easy it would have been to join sides with one of the factions? Remember though, these events were not important to Christians. They needed to be alert and decisive and not distracted. Finally, around November, Cestius Gallus, the governor of Syria, marched with his troops and camped about 6 miles from Jerusalem. Even though it was a Sabbath day, the Jewish rebels streamed out of the city and made a hasty assault on the Romans. The Romans retreated to Beth Horon and the Jews captured Roman supplies and weapons. Agrippa sent 2 representatives, his personal friends, to the Jewish rebels to persuade them to lay down their weapons and to promise them clemency. But the rebels killed one of the men and wounded the other. Cestius pursued the rebels to Jerusalem, camped at Mount Scopus for 3 days, and then started to undermine the city wall and tried to set fire to the gate of the temple. But then, for some unexpected reason, Gallus and his army retreated. Alert Christians in Jerusalem and Judea immediately acted decisively and fled. The rebels chased the Roman army, inflicting considerable losses in both men and supplies, and Gallus ordered his soldiers to retreat. After 7 days, the Jewish rebels gave up chasing the Romans and pillaged the supplies left behind. They returned to Jerusalem after 8 days. What was the situation in Jerusalem at that time? Josephus says, "In the face of the exhilaration which now seized Jerusalem, the spokesmen for peace with Rome were obliged to remain silent. Even those opposed to war were swept along by the force of the circumstances. Those who supported Rome left. All the rest were won over to the side of the rebels, partly by force, partly by persuasion." If you were there, what would you have done? Many Jews started to flee to Jerusalem, seeking refuge there. But was it a safe refuge? No. There was anarchy in the city. Several Jewish political factions fought each other. Eventually, in 70 CE, Jerusalem was destroyed along with its temple. But the Christians, who were alert and decisive, were safe far away in Pella, on the other side of the Jordan River.
Okay, so here's what I got out of that video presentation that Jeffrey Jackson presented about 66 CE. A lot of stuff happened in 66 CE. Okay, a lot of things happen every year. It's not just one event. There's a lot of things that happen all over the place. And as far as him saying that the Christians are just like, we're unconcerned, that doesn't seem right. Of course they were concerned. And Jesus said, hey, get out of that area. He didn't say, don't be concerned, just chill. It'll all blow over. No, he said, get out when it's safe. So just being like, not concerning yourself with what's going on, there was murders and there was wars and rebellions and all this stuff going on, and people were getting killed left, right, and center. If I was there, as he asked, what would you do? I'd probably be a little concerned too. There's a war going on right now in the Ukraine, and the brothers and sisters there weren't like, I'm not concerned. No, many of them hightailed it out of the Ukraine so they could get to safety, so they wouldn't be killed. So, everything that I hear from this organization, it just doesn't sit right with me. There's always some sort of a spin they put on things, and it just doesn't feel genuine. It always feels like there's a means to an end and a manipulation going on. So, yeah, that's what I think of that part. So now he carries on with the modern day application. Here we go.
What do we learn from this brief review of the events of 66 CE?
Let me guess, a lot of stuff happened
It
then.
wasn't just one event, was it? But a series of events. Were you amazed at how many events occurred in 66 CE? And that was just a brief
Not really.
summary. There were many divisive political and religious issues that could have been distracting to Christians.
Like a rebellion?
So those Christians needed to remain focused on their hope. They needed to
Except
remember
for the ones that got killed
that
in the
Jerusalem
rebellion.
and its temple gave no security for them. Why should we be so interested in all of this today. Notice what else Jesus said as recorded at Luke chapter 21, verses 34 through 36. But pay attention to yourselves, that your hearts never become weighed down with overeating and heavy drinking and anxieties of life, and suddenly that day be instantly upon you as a snare. For it will come upon all those dwelling on the face of the whole earth. Keep awake then, all the time making supplication, that you may succeed in escaping all these things that must occur, and in standing before the Son of Man.
Try these on for size. When they questioned him, saying, Teacher, when will these things actually be, and what will be the sign of these things are to occur? He said, Look out that you are not misled, for many will come on the basis of my name, saying, I am he, and though due time is near, do not go after them. That's also from that chapter and verse. So, yeah, that sounds like that could fit the faithful and discreet slave. Don't go after them. Don't be misled.
Jesus said that these things would occur on the face of the whole earth. That means he wasn't just talking about Christians in the first century. He was talking about us today.
That does not say that this would happen 2,000 years after the fact. No, that's not proof. That's just saying that things would happen all over the place. But that doesn't give a time. That doesn't necessarily mean it's this time of the end.
Yes, we need to pay attention and be alert. He also reminded us to make supplication, yes, to strengthen our relationship with Jehovah. What does this mean for us today? As we face the Great Tribulation, brothers and sisters, we don't know exactly all the details of what will happen. But we do know that Jesus did not mean that we would have to flee one literal city or go to a certain mountain range. How could we? We're scattered over the whole face of the earth. But we do need to remember the same things that the first century Christians needed to remember. Don't put our trust in the religious and political systems of Satan's world. Why is this so vital? Just as in 66 CE, today we see one event after another leading up to the final day. Everywhere there is evidence of political instability and infighting, not only among nations, but also within nations.
So just like in 66 CE, there's instability and infighting. How does it make this time special at all? It was happening that long ago. And you can't be like, well, it's happening all over and it's happening in greater numbers. That's not necessarily true. History proves that there's a lot of stuff that went down even worse than today.
Religious, political, and social issues, including abortion and homosexuality, have become divisive topics. Scientific issues, such as global warming, have also become political issues.
And do you know why these things have become divisive and political issues today? Because they're important. Because they're things that people are getting hurt and killed about and losing their rights. And that's important, that people get through that people have their rights. It's important. You can't just ignore the issues of the day. It comes back around to the whole issue of compassion that you were talking about at the beginning of this presentation, Jeffrey Jackson. If you don't care about those issues, you don't have compassion for people who are affected by them.
Just as in the first century, we must take to heart Jesus' warning. Don't take sides in the chaos that's happening all around us. Yes, keep your focus on the kingdom hope. Remember, soon we will face events that will test our integrity as never before. So what are the takeaway points? Well, first of all, we realize that now is the time we need to make decisions and stick to those decisions.
Unless the bad decisions.
Yes, we need to be absolutely determined not to put our faith and trust in worldly politics. We need to remain neutral, always thinking of God's kingdom. We also need to remember that it's not just one event coming up in the future. There can be a series of events all happening at the same time. They could be distracting. But if we have made up our decision now, we'll be ready for that time. And also, we remember the need to keep our relationship strong with Jehovah God. And we remember the compassion of Jesus. So Jehovah and Jesus want us to be protected at that time.
Your compassion is fake, Jeffrey Jackson. It's fake.
So may we be determined to continue to be alert and decisive.
And so this concludes part 2 of the 2022 annual meeting of the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society of Pennsylvania meeting. I want to thank you all for hanging out on my little slice of YouTube, and I hope that I'll see you again tomorrow. I'm going to try and have all the parts out now that I think I found the magic sauce to be able to put out this content in a reasonable amount of time. I'm going to try and get out the whole thing daily. So look out for the next piece come tomorrow. Have a great day, and don't forget to like and subscribe and all that stuff, okay? And I'll catch you next time. Bye.
So I wonder if Jeffrey Jackson's integrity
Is in way when you're in the yes, no.